You know which goaltender had a pretty good run with the Habs last season, albeit it was pretty short, but a good run nonetheless? No, we're not talking about Carey Price because he had his ups, he had his downs. For sure, there was inconsistencies there. And we're not talking about Keith Kinkaid either because, boy oh boy, if there was a signing that didn't end up working out the way that we liked, it probably would have been Keith Kinkaid. I'm talking today about Cayden Primeau, the new CP in Montreal, the next CP to take over the crease once Carey Price ends up leaving the city or retiring or whatever. Sure, that's going to be in a very, very long time because Carey Price's contract goes on for a very long time. I do know that. The contract expires in 2026 when Carey Price is going to be 38 years old. Yeah, I know. It's really, really big. But nevertheless, Cayden Primeau is a guy that a lot of Montreal Canadiens fans would say is their best goaltending prospect. And for good reason, too. As a guy who was a Vancouver Canucks fan, I was a very big believer in Adam Gaudette when he was playing with the Northeastern University Huskies back a few years ago. Because I watched Huskies games and highlights and the like, I got to familiarize myself with the team, and somebody who always stood out to me was the goaltender of the Huskies, Cayden Primeau, a guy that the Montreal Canadiens selected in the 2017 NHL entry draft in the 7th round. We talked about this in a video a few years ago about how the Montreal Canadiens scouting staff had to really put in a lot of work to convince the higher-ups that, yeah, this Cayden Primeau guy is the real deal. Sure, playing for the Lincoln Stars in the USHL, he wasn't amazing, but trust, put faith in the scouting, believe in the system, and let's take this player over here. And nowadays, Cayden Primeau is a guy who is very, very highly touted. His 2 years with the Northeastern University Huskies saw him as one of the best goaltenders in the entire league. Despite being an 18, 19-year-old player, he had a .931 and a .933 save percentage. Obviously, as a Canucks fan, I'm watching Adam Gaudette do Adam Gaudette-like things with the Huskies. I'm watching Tyler Madden do Tyler Madden-like things with the Huskies. And Cayden Primeau was always in the background, manning the crease and being very, very stable back then as well. So, you can imagine the shock, you can imagine the excitement when in the preseason for 2019-20, Cayden Primeau suited up for a few games in Montreal. And he didn't look out of place. For a guy who recently turned 20 years old in August of 2019, Cayden Primeau looked really, really good at the NHL level. He had a few really nice, spectacular saves, and ultimately, he didn't end up making the team, of course, because you're not going to give the backup goaltender position to a 20-year-old guy. That just doesn't really happen unless your name is Carter Hart. But his first pro NHL-related year has just concluded, and Cayden Primeau is coming off of what most would say was a pretty okay campaign with the Laval Rocket. Now, he did get called up for 2 games in the NHL, a .252 goals against average, and a .931 save percentage over there. That is crazy. His team kind of hung him out to dry in that. But at the same time, the majority of his work was with Laval this past season, where he put up a .908 save percentage in 33 games and a .245 goals against average. If you go to the AHL in its entirety and you search by U21 goaltenders and you see the selection of guys in the league, you could see that there were only 6 goaltenders in the entire AHL who were below the age of 21. And Cayden Primeau was the second best in save percentage, tied with Michael DiPietro. So obviously there aren't too many goaltenders at that age range in this league and doing things that Cayden Primeau was able to do, but at the same time, goalies take a long time to develop. You won't really see a goaltender become an NHL guy immediately, again, unless your name is Carter Hart. At the same time, though, Carter Hart is the exception and not the rule, so there isn't really any incentive for me to believe that Cayden Primeau is going to become a full-time NHL backup next season. If it were up to me, I would say that Cayden Primeau probably has a lot more to give at the AHL level, and that the best is yet to come when it comes to this kind of prospect, especially when it comes to how he can do in Laval. There's a reason the Canadiens signed Vasily Demchenko, and they also have incentive to keep guys like Lindgren, etc. in their system too. Lindgren's a guy who, honestly, I could see being the backup guy in Montreal full-time, just because if the Canadiens want to go with a Carey Price 110%, you're going to give Carey Price about 60 games in an NHL season, and the backup is probably only going to get like 20. So there's a situation in my mind where the Habs don't really need to rush anybody to take that backup spot to be forced to play upwards of 30 to 35 games in the NHL. You have a Carey Price at $10-point-something million. You have to use that goaltender as if he's a $10-point-something million goaltender. And we know that when Carey Price is on his game, he can be, some nights, one of the best goaltenders in the world. So there isn't an incentive in my mind to rush any of these goaltending prospects in through the system. Whether that's Cayden Primeau or Vasily Demchenko or whatever, there's no real need to do that. So to me, I'm personally fine with saying, okay, Cayden Primeau, you had a .908 save percentage in the AHL. Let's get that up to a .915 for next season. Let's bolster this AHL Laval Rocket lineup and give Cayden Primeau an opportunity to do better for next season. He's only 20 years old. He'll be 21 once 2021 rolls around, and there's still so much time for a goaltending prospect like this to develop. For a guy who was one of the better goaltenders in the NCAA and one of the most underrated goaltending prospects when he was drafted, there's certainly a lot of room to move forward with a player like this. Obviously, it's tougher to judge goaltending prospects because points are different from save percentage, but Cayden Primeau is a guy who has been pretty good everywhere he has been for the past few years. His Lincoln Stars year when he was drafted wasn't amazing, but the seasons after that, hey, he was a World Juniors star, a .936 in the World Juniors last year with a 161 goals against average. That is incredibly good. He was given the Mike Richter Award last season in the NCAA as the league's best goalie, and now there's so much reason to believe that Cayden Primeau's direction is only going to go up from here. Going back to that Carey Price video that we made a few years ago, the Carey Price replacement, as you would say, a lot of the things that I said back then are honestly still kind of true now. The reason that Cayden Primeau is able to do well is because of the same reasons that Carey Price is able to do well. Remember when Carey Price was the Team Canada goalie in 2014? He wasn't dynamic at all. And the reason I say that is because Carey Price was as still as a rock in the crease, but he was just able to save everything coming his way. They proclaimed Carey Price as like a grandpa sitting in a rocking chair back and forth, just cool, calm, collected, saving everything that comes his way and not really looking like he's sweating out there because it's so effortless when he makes those saves. That kind of quality is the same kind of goaltending that you see with a Cayden Primeau, and it was very prevalent in Laval, don't get me wrong, but of course, Laval is a higher tier of hockey than the NCAA. In the NCAA and the World Juniors, Cayden Primeau was just so smooth and so calm in the crease that the same Carey Price-like qualities that he had in the Olympics a few years ago were definitely present there in Cayden Primeau's game as well. Going forward, I want to see him capitalize on that, and I want to see him be able to make those saves as effortlessly as he looked to be making them as he did in college a few years ago. It's very funny how the next in line goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens also is a CP initial goaltender, from Carey Price to Cayden Primeau, CP31 to CP30. Obviously, the similarities and the coincidences are uncanny, but at the same time, the Canadiens do have a legitimately elite potential goaltender at their disposal here, and the worst thing they could do is mess it up. The best thing they could do, though, is really give themselves a grade A goaltender once Carey Price leaves, once he retires, and once that contract is off the books. Sure, it may take 6 years for that to happen, but Once Cayden Primeau is a full-time starter in this league, I don't think anybody is going to be complaining now, won't they? So comment down below what you think about Cayden Primeau and what's next for him. I just laid it out right here. A .915 save percentage in Laval sounds great, but if he does better than that, I'd be very happy with that as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.